MeTV is America's #1 classic TV entertainment network, airing over 60 of the greatest TV series every week. Now, MeTV presents The Golden Girls of Summer, showcasing the best of the Golden Girls. Watch Dorothy, Blanche, Rose, and Sophia weeknights on MeTV at 10 p.m. 9 Central. Log on to MeTV.com now to find out where to watch MeTV free over the air and on cable, satellite, and select streaming services. MeTV is memorable entertainment television.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com. This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace.
Last year, I went through many different life changes. I needed to take a pause and examine how I was feeling in the inside to better show up for the ones who need me to be my best version of myself.
When you're navigating life's changes, Talkspace can help. Talkspace is the #1 rated online therapy, bringing you professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatry providers that you can access anytime, anywhere.
Living a busy life, navigating a long-distance relationship, becoming a first-step father, Talkspace made all of those journeys possible. I could speak with my therapist in the office. I could speak with my therapist in the comfort of my home. I was never alone.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Yay Networks.
We eat for so many reasons other than hunger, hundreds of reasons, really. And many of these, if not most of these, can really be narrowed down into 6 main categories or clusters of reasons why. And some of these reasons are really unexpected. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. A quick note before we dive in. If you like what you hear in this podcast, I would love for you to subscribe to us wherever you download your podcast. And it would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things matter and they really help us. Why do we overeat? This is a fully loaded question for so many of us. No matter how balanced we may feel or how healthy our relationship with food may feel, we've all been there. We've all been there where we just overdid it. We are uncomfortably full. We may or may not be really beating ourselves up on it. Sometimes we may just kind of let it go. Other times we just have such guilt that surrounds our action. There's so much more to food and eating than simply eating because we're hungry, simply eating to fuel our bodies. For so many of us, there's so many other reasons of why we eat, and in turn, so many reasons of why we overeat. It's nearly impossible to touch on all aspects of why every single individual may be inclined to overeat, whether it's on a regular basis or from time to time or just that sporadic occasion. But with that said, there's about 6 main categories that I've sort of over the years narrowed it down to, that they don't encompass everything, of course, but they really do capture the essence for most people of why we're overeating. Most of the time, they can fit into one of these 6 categories. So we're going to be talking about each of these today, some in a lot more detail. Others I'll be touching on just kind of loosely, but these 6 main categories are sort of like the underlying reasons of why we overeat. And so understanding which of these your patterns are falling into and understanding a little bit maybe of the why can help us to get above it, to pull ourselves out of that, especially if we feel like we have little or no control. So those 6 are, I'm going to kind of go in order here, but the first is an over-reliance on processed foods. And I'll explain more in a bit what I mean by that. The second is the impact of carbs when combined with fat and salt and what that does to basically the circuitry in our brains that lights up these pleasure pathways. So our over-reliance on processed foods is really a strong one that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today, followed closely by that impact of carbs, especially when we pair carbs with salt and fat, and how that's affecting these pleasure centers in our brains and really trigger more cravings. Then there's the emotional reasons we overeat. There's medications that can be responsible. And then there may be just pure physical hunger. Or it's really not any deeper than it simply tastes really good, or you've got a lot of options in front of you. So we'll be breaking each of these down, each 6 of these, and kind of talking about the why behind each of these. And my goal is that as you're listening to these, you can identify with which category you are most aligned with. And it might span all 6 of them, but there's probably 1 or 2 that really nail it for you, that's really what's the strongest underlying driver of why you overeat. So as we're hearing it, I hope that you can take away some of the why this is happening, some of the science behind it. I think also understanding that science behind it helps us feel less guilty about our behaviors. It helps us be less likely to beat ourselves up. That's something that I've seen just, in the decades and working with clients and talking with people about nutrition. There's so much pressure we put on ourselves for perfection. And there's so much self-disappointment when we feel like we failed. So we put these expectations up there. And a lot of times we are setting that bar really high. And when we don't hit it, we're bashing ourselves and we're telling ourselves these things that are really negative. We are incredibly disappointed with ourselves. We feel like we don't have the willpower. And quite often we are talking to ourselves in a very different voice or tone than we would ever speak to anybody else who might be going through these struggles. So my hope is that in hearing this, you can start to understand some of the why, some of the science behind it, and start to release some of that guilt, the negative self-talk that in turn leads to often self-sabotage. So starting with that first one, that over-reliance on processed foods, there's been some really interesting science that has come out lately. There's a researcher, I would check him out, check out some of the studies he's done. His name is Kevin Hall. He's a researcher at the National Institutes of Health. And he's done a lot of studies to try to help us understand how our food environment and what's surrounding us, how this can help to, or the influence it has on our appetite, and how our food environment, what's around us, is causing us to overeat and in turn gain body fat. So he's done a bunch of different studies, and some of these are where the study volunteers are actually living in a lab for weeks. So everything is controlled. That matters because a lot of times research or studies that we see a headline on of, this percent of people who eat these foods have this attribute, or, this many people who drink green tea lose weight. A lot of these are self-reported, and they're saying what they typically do in a day. They're answering a questionnaire, and we're loosely looking at the association between the behaviors they tell us they do and what the trends or the markers we see about their physical attributes or whatever the thing is that we're measuring. Very, very different though when you have somebody that's actually living in a lab in this very controlled setting. And one of the studies he did, it was in 2019. I'll link to the study. It was in the Journal of Cell Metabolism. He had 20 people in this controlled environment, and he gave them largely unprocessed foods for 2 full weeks. And then he switched to do largely ultra processed foods for 2 weeks. So when you say, okay, well, what's unprocessed? What are, that's things that are going to be like our lean proteins, like our lean meat, fish, poultry, vegetables, fruits, whole grains. It would be things like eggs, legumes, unsweetened yogurt. Those are going to be our unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Now, something like oats, they're processed, but they're really minimally processed. So thinking about a truly whole food based diet. So these are things that as we're eating them is how they are pretty much in nature. There's really not a lot of packaging around them. There's not a lot of change in these foods from their original state until when they arrive on our plate and we're actually eating them. So minimally processed foods, unprocessed or minimally processed foods. People got that for 2 full weeks. And then they also got ultra processed foods for 2 full weeks. So what do we mean by ultra processed? So when we think about ultra processed foods, think about foods that they're so far removed from their original state. They look nothing like that original food did by the time it's landing in our grocery cart, in our pantry, coming out of the drive-through window. So this is going to be things like sugary drinks, soft drinks. It would also be like sugary coffee drinks and all that stuff. It's the chips, the ice cream, the cookies, pastries, all this kind of stuff, but also breakfast cereal. A lot of, most I would say cereal bars, yogurts, especially the sugary flavored yogurts, pizza, hot dogs, chicken nuggets, most of the things coming out of most fast food windows. These are going to be things that are ultra processed foods. So in Kevin Hall's study, he gave this group of 20 people who were living at the National Institutes of Health, living basically in this lab environment. He gave them for 2 weeks, largely unprocessed foods, those whole foods, and then 2 weeks with the ultra processed foods. And what he found is that people ate an average of 500 calories more a day on the ultra processed foods compared to the unprocessed. Now, here's the thing. Basically, the foods were put out there and people were like, it wasn't a weight loss study. They weren't told it's a weight loss study. And the foods were there. They could eat as much or as little as they wanted. So they weren't given a set amount and said, you have to eat this amount. The foods were there. They could come and go. They could eat to satisfy their appetite. They could eat as much as they wanted. They could step away when they wanted. So it was really interesting to see that the ultra processed foods translated to an average of 500 calories extra each day. Now, if that's an average of 500 calories, that means some of the people had way more than 500 calories a day. So what happened as a result of that is when they were on the ultra processed diet, over the course of those 2 weeks, they gained 2 pounds. When they were on the unprocessed diet, they actually lost 2 pounds. Part of the reason for this increase in calorie consumption on these ultra processed foods we're talking about is that they have, basically, if you're looking at those foods and you look at the ultra processed compared to those real whole foods, those processed foods have nearly twice the calorie density compared to the whole foods. What that means is if you looked at every ounce of food or every pound of food, when we're talking about all those things, the fast food, the cookies, the chips, the ice cream, ounce for ounce, it's packing in twice as many calories as that real whole food unprocessed diet. And this is important because over the years, there's been a lot of different studies that find that we eat less, we consume fewer calories when we have foods around us that have a lower calorie density, meaning that for every bite or every ounce or every, measure of that food, it has less calories. So if you think about, all the advice that you hear over the years, some people say drink a glass of water before a meal or have a brothy soup before a meal. The idea of those things is they're high volume. They take up a lot of space. They have a lot of weight, but they're really low calories. So if you're not a soup person before a meal or having a glass of water before a meal seems kind of like a forced thing, the obvious there is stuff like more vegetables, more whole fruits. So finding these ways that we're adding things into our diet that give us a lot of volume, but for fewer calories. So that's a large part of the reason of why we're overeating these ultra processed foods or why we're eating more is, they're denser. They pack in more calories. But that also leads us to that second one that we talked about. So the first reason of why we're overeating is that many of us have this reliance on these processed foods. The second that I mentioned is that relationship or what happens when we're having these foods with carbs combined with fat and salt. I mentioned a bit ago about that influence that they have on our brain and they're lighting up these pleasure centers in our brain. Well, most of those ultra processed foods we just said, we could pretty much say almost all of those, they're a blend of carbs and fat and salt. Pretty much all of them. I mean, if you think about French fries or potato chips, cookies, ice cream, many of these ultra processed foods, they are essentially carbs, but then they also have a hefty bit of fat, a hefty bit of salt. And why this matters, why this is so important is, yes, these ultra processed foods are twice as dense in calories, but the fact that they have that combination, the carb with fat and salt, these foods actually stimulate our brain in very much the same way that addictive drugs like cocaine and amphetamines do. And that's a really strong statement to say, and it's hard for people to think that that's even true. But we look at that combination, and when there's testing and we're looking at brain activity, we see that that combination activates certain parts of the brain that actually increase our desire, our cravings to eat more. And when you think about those foods, you think about the French fries or pizza or chocolate or ice cream, they have these. The level of intensity, though, of this reaction in our brains, that level of intensity varies by person. So we all fall at different places along the spectrum. Some of us have an intensely strong reaction. I've had people describe it almost as a euphoria. They'll consume volumes of food and types of foods that some people may say, oh, wow, I could never eat that much, fill in the blank. I would be sick to my stomach. Yet when someone is highly reactive and highly sensitive to these effects, it truly elicits a high, a feeling of euphoria is how they describe it. And so they are incredibly sensitive. This is often the type of person who does truly feel like they're addicted. And sometimes for that person, a little bite or a little snack pack or just a little bit of it won't hurt can actually be really damaging because it can be what sets them off. Then there's the far other end of the spectrum, that person who doesn't even ever feel like they are hungry, they don't feel like they crave, they don't have any of that they're really experiencing on a regular basis. They're still going to have this circuitry impacted to some degree, but it's such a small, mild impact that it really doesn't affect their day-to-day choices, their food choices, or their relationship with food, really, for that matter. So food makers are also using this to their advantage. So when we're talking about all those ultra processed foods, it's not coincidence that they also have this crave creating blend of carb, salt, fat. So that's not to say that we can blame just the food industry for this. We do have to take responsibility. Those foods may be in the store. We're the ones picking them up and they're landing in our pantry. They're landing in our fridge or our freezer, or we're the ones swinging through the drive-through and picking them up. So those foods are there. Food makers know what triggers us. They know what's pulling us in, but it's also up to us to be aware of it and to make those specific conscious choices to surround ourselves with different foods so that we're not setting ourselves up for that failure, for that spiral of cravings that we're triggering with that combination of carb, salt, fat. And if you think about it, when is the last time someone's like, oh my gosh, I can't stop eating this grilled shrimp or this grilled chicken? Maybe every once in a while, but really you have a bit of it. You eat it till you're pleasantly full, and then usually you're going to stop. Same thing with something like broccoli. People aren't like, oh my God, I can't stop eating this. But when it comes to those other foods, French fries, pasta, pizza, ice cream, chips, those things are those that drive us to eat more and more and more. And when we understand that it's actually lighting up these areas of our brains that are activating and revving up our desire to eat more, it makes a lot more sense. I'd like to take a bit to share about Nutrafol, sponsor for this week's podcast. The nutrients in Nutrafol supplements support our healthy hair growth from within by targeting the 5 root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, and metabolism. Nutrafol is a physician-formulated nutritional supplement that is made with potent botanicals. So no matter your stage in life, Nutrafol has a solution. Nutrafol Women is ideal if you're experiencing thinning hair caused by stress, dieting, overstyling, or environmental toxins. And Nutrafol Men improves hair growth with visibly more thickness. You can grow thicker, stronger hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com and using promo code FUELED to get 20% off. This is their best offer available anywhere. Plus, free shipping on every order. Get 20% off at Nutrafol.com, promo code FUELED. Their best offer anywhere, 20% off at Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code FUELED, for hair as strong as you are. So when we look at these first two of really strong reasons of why we overeat, the abundance of ultra-processed foods and maybe our over-reliance, how much we're turning to this, and then number two, that reaction that we have to carb, salt, fat, they're really, one is so related to the other, and understanding of how we're responding to these and why it's so important. It's not just to say like, oh, those Doritos are bad, but if that's your trigger food, understanding that and really starting to break that cycle. So that leads us to our third element of why we overeat, and this is emotional reasons. And that's a very huge blanket statement to say that people eat for emotional reasons. I know very, very few people who don't. There are people who are, almost like monk-like in their behavior around food, and they truly eat only to fuel their body, to fuel their movement, and they see food more as a science than a pleasure. Those people are in the really rare minority. Most people are eating out of some emotional reason. Now, it might not be that you're overeating and this is a problem because of this emotional reason, but there's all these ties, these connections. There's foods that we love, they're our favorites, and we can't wait to have whatever that is because it was a childhood favorite, or because this person who we were really close to, that was what they always made us, or that was what they made us when we were sick, or whatever it might be. We have these connections in our mind, these relationships between food and different feelings that we've had. And when we associate them with positive feelings, positive memories and experiences, it's really easy to want to turn to those foods as those comfort foods. So emotional eating happens to many of us. Most of us, I would say, foods bring us to another place. They bring us to these memories. They bring us to these experiences. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's when the emotional drives to eat are fueling this underlying and uncontrollable urge to overeat and to eat in a way that is self-destructive. We could do an entire multiple episodes on this, but I'll give some of the examples of emotional eating that I see with clients. I mean, many times it's nighttime. It's usually not in the morning. It's usually not even before lunchtime. It's often in the afternoon, and it's even more common in the evening and night times. And what I find is the things that are in our mind, the things that are swirling, if it's as simple as that stressor from the day, maybe negative feedback you got from your boss, or if it is deep rooted as childhood trauma, when we have a lot going on through the day and we're distracted, sometimes that just keeps our mind off of it. And we're not thinking of food as much. But as our day starts to wind down and our day starts to get quieter, those emotions start to get louder. And it could be stress from the day. It could be simply fatigue or feeling overwhelmed for the day. Or like we said, it could be these deeper things from years ago that still continue to rear their head now. When the world is quiet, these emotions, these feelings start to surface. So how we deal with this third level of why we overeat, kind of this third category of why we overeat, it's not a simple, let's talk about it now, and this is going to give you a tool. I would say being aware of it, understanding first what's driving, because I think a lot of times we don't. I'll have clients who they're getting out of bed at 2, 3 in the morning, and they're going down to the kitchen, and they are eating to numb out from whatever has been swirling in their minds at night, or before they go to bed. It feels very lonely, or they feel very isolated, or these things are flooding through their mind, and when they eat, it serves as a distraction. So we've done a podcast before on how we eat and how we, quote, stress eat, and strategies for that. So I'll link to that podcast. But what I find with clients on this is really starting to peel back what's behind it, the first thing that I'll ask them to do is, as we're talking through their day, if they're keeping a food journal, that's ideal. Even if you're not going to take the time to keep a journal, or maybe keeping a journal stresses you even more, or it leaves you feeling even more disappointed whenever you're seeing your food choices in that journal. But start to pay attention to when that lack of control happens in your day, because it's usually probably going to be at a pretty consistent time. And start to understand, or start to pay attention, what time of day is this happening? Or are there certain places you are throughout your day when this is happening? Dr. Dave Galarno is a psychiatrist at Oxnard Health here in New Orleans. I'll link to the podcast he and I have done as well. He calls it people, places, things. What are these triggers? What's triggering this craving or this behavior? When we start to identify that trend, that's the first step. So I would encourage you, it's not a simple answer on this third category at all. Ultra processed foods and this carb, salt, fat, that's a little more science-based. That's a little bit more, these foods have a hold on us, but there's some really easy things that we can start changing our buying patterns, start changing our eating patterns, which we'll talk a little bit more through, that feel a little bit easier. But this emotional reason, this emotional drive that's behind a lot of us of why we just feel so vulnerable to overeating, that is not a simple answer. So what I'll say here, and I'll link to these other podcasts that I think you'll find helpful, is start to take note of, when do these cravings happen, these times of feeling out of control? What is a common thread that we can identify here? And sometimes identifying that common thread can be really uncomfortable. It might be, when we say people, places, things, it might be a person that you're incredibly close with, or they have a really strong role in your life. But maybe is that the common thread? And that, again, it can be not always an easy thing to identify or thing to admit. So start to take note of, when we feel this way, is it usually on the way home that you're pulling into a place to get some of those things that are, like I had one client who told me she's looking for love in all the wrong places, the candy aisle at the drugstore or the convenience store. So is it on the way home? Is it that transition time between work to home that you're looking for something? Is it after dinner when the world's getting quiet? Is it in the middle of the night? What are the things that are the common threads here is going to be the starting point. I'll encourage you to listen to the podcast with Dr. Dave Galarno. He has some incredible strategies about behavior change around our identifying these people, places, things. He's done an Alcohol Free for 40 podcast with me. But listen to it. Even if you're like, I'm not a big drinker, I want you to listen to it if you are looking at this behavior change, because these examples and tools and strategies that he shares, they go hand in hand. Our drive to eat and overeat is very, very similar to our drive to abuse alcohol and things. And a lot of the reasons and the triggers, they may manifest differently, but a lot of the reasons and triggers can they can really be similar in how they're rooted. So when we move to our fourth, when we look at what else can drive our urge to overeat, medications can. And I think a lot of people have experienced like, oh my gosh, I was taking steroids for whatever condition, for a temporary thing that I had a steroid injection, or I was taking steroid pills, and gosh, I couldn't eat enough. Like I had such an appetite, like rabid appetite. So there's certain things like that we know, but there's also one of the biggest ones that I'll note is sleep aids, like an Ambien type of a sleep aid. And when I've had clients who are taking these, the overeating and the compulsion to overeat at times that they have no idea they're doing it has been just wild. And the stories that they've shared, I might have shared on this podcast before. This is like one of the most mind-blowing is I had a client and she was taking one of the sleep aids. Her husband was telling her like that she had been eating at night. She didn't believe him. And they had a bunch of kids in the house and she just thought this was them like doing it. It wasn't her. And she just was like, you're making that up. Why are you, she just denied it. Until one night he comes downstairs to find her sitting on the bottom step. She had the Easter baskets for all the grandkids, and she had it was the night before Easter. She had eaten all the candy. It was as if like, their Labrador had gotten into the Easter baskets. I mean, it was just destroyed. And she had eaten all the grandkids' candy like the night before she's supposed to give them all their baskets. And then she finally realized, wow, I have been doing this. Multiple clients, though, when they take a prescription sleep aid, eating and essentially sleep eating or eating within this brain fog that they don't even remember it, and really overeating is not uncommon. So depending on medications you're taking, that can drive that urge to overeat. So the fifth and the sixth, these are lighter. These are a lot easier to address. Physical hunger is one that we've all been there. We thought we were going to have an opportunity to eat, or we just didn't do our best in planning, and we're ravenous. We finally get to eat, and we eat way more than we should, and we're feeling uncomfortably full. So I'd say physical hunger is something that is a very natural reason of why we overeat. For most of us, that's not at the root of why we feel guilty about overeating, though. So yeah, that's one of the reasons we overeat, is because we're physically truly hungry. But if we've done a good job of trying to kind of plan out through the day, and just on the day in, day out, you've got a good rhythm of when your meals and snacks are and how you're fueling your body, I'm less worried about that. There's always going to be the time that there's the exception, and we might overeat. And I would say we're human. Don't beat yourself up on that. Let that go, because that's the rarity. The last instance, and this is sort of what I call the sixth one, is like opportunity eating. And this is when something it tastes really good and you love it and you just can't stop eating it. Maybe it's something that you don't have access to that much. It's something that when you do have it, you're like, oh my gosh, I just can't stop. Now, a lot of those also will say are the carb, salt, fat. So that's one of those where when it happens just here and there, we're human. And again, don't beat yourself up. If it's something that it's rare that you've got it, or maybe it's the first time you've tried it, it's something that is special. It's just that once a year that you have it and you kind of feel like you just want a little bit more of it. Also, when we have multiple options. So think about like a party and there's a bunch of different types of foods there, or a buffet. When we have more options, we tend to eat more. Done. Like there's not maybe. Over and over and over. We see studies that show us that when we have more options, we tend to eat more. So if you had, one type of chicken dish, I think about we order from an Indian restaurant a lot and we get multiple things. And I definitely have more because we might have 3 or 4 different types of dishes in front of me. I definitely consume a larger volume than I would if I only had 1 or 2 of those options. So when we have multiple options, or we just think something tastes really, really good, there are those times that we overeat. And again, when it's something that's at that party or that event, and we've got all this kind of array, this spread of food out there, that's that opportunity eating. It's there, we eat it, we might eat too much of it. But if that just happens here and there, kind of the same thing as if we just let ourselves get too hungry, let it go. Don't beat yourself up about that. So to sum it up, really for all of these, especially those first 2 categories we talked about, that ultra processed and then these carbs, salt, fat, and this, which also can then lead to the abundance of reaching for an abundance of these when we do have these emotional challenges and we are turning to food to sort of numb out from that. So when we look at a few just key strategies to help manage and get ahead of some of these reasons why we overeat. First, like we said a bit ago, try to pinpoint where these cravings are coming from. What's the common theme? Is it a certain time, certain place, around certain people? Trying to pinpoint where these triggers are coming from, what's bringing this on. And it might be that you're bored, you're looking for that distraction. You might be tired and you're just looking for food for that pick-me-up. It could be totally situational. You stop by, you're at a certain place and it happens. A lot of people have it when they go to their parents' house. They may not have lived there for years or decades or more, but they still have those patterns they had as a kid. They stand and they stare in the fridge and pantry because that's what they've always done. So once you realize where these triggers are coming from, what these triggers are, they start to be easier, at least a bit easier to manage. I'd also say add a bit of structure to your day. That doesn't mean that everything has to be planned, but think ahead to where you're going to be that day or where you're going to be, what's on your schedule, where you're going to have access to food or not. So think about Are you going to need to plan for something for a snack or a breakfast or a lunch, or is it going to be there? If you're going to a meeting and breakfast is going to be provided, which now post-COVID, these things are starting to happen again. Don't always rely on the fact that or don't count on the fact that it might be actually nutritious. So you may either ask or just bring something as a backup. I would also say make sure that whatever you're doing, as you add the structure to your day, you're thinking about the meals and snacks that you're going to have. Make sure that as you are surrounding yourself with these foods that are real, whole, largely unprocessed foods. So again, shifting away from that stuff that you open the package, it's there. There's ultra processed, so shifting away from that. But as we get into these real whole foods, find foods that you truly love. And that's going to be key, because making yourself eat something that you just feel, about, it's just going to be a short-term solution. It's not going to last. So the last thing I'll say is that fighting our cravings, and sometimes we don't have to fight it, listen to it, and it depends on the person. Maybe if you are craving something, do you feel comfortable that you can have a bit of it and you're going to be fine? And for a lot of people, they've gotten to a point where, they can have a scoop of real ice cream, a scoop of real gelato. They can open that bag of chips and have a handful and put the bag back. Those things are fine, y'all. That is absolutely fine. It's less about what we're talking about. You know what your capacity is at this point in time. That's not to say it's always going to be that way. There's a lot of things that I used to maybe not keep around because I felt like, once it's open, it's really hard to not continue to eat it day after day or keep going back for more. Whereas some of those things now, I don't feel that way. I feel that I can have a little bit, close that package up, put it back. And so just knowing where we are, knowing what that level of confidence we have in our ability, and then sometimes testing ourselves, and we might fail and sometimes we may pass, but knowing that we can evolve in that relationship and how we respond to food. So I would say, we often think that we need to fight our cravings. Sometimes we might listen to them. Maybe it means that we really haven't been giving ourselves enough foods that we actually really enjoy, and starting to reassess that. Paying attention to what keeps you feeling fuller longer, what keeps you feeling satiated when you eat certain foods, when you crave others less. Setting yourself up for victory by preparing for things that are going to happen. So if you know you're going to be in a situation where they've got something that's kind of a weakness of yours, think about it ahead, anticipate how you're going to handle that situation. And then the biggest thing we can do, I can't say it enough, is surround yourself with healthful options, those real whole food options that you also love, so that you're setting yourself up truly for success. Our Eat Fit team, we actually in our nutrition department at Ashner Fitness Center, we have a shopping guide. It's a brand specific shopping guide. So I'll link to that also. It's actually on our app. So it's on our Eat Fit smartphone app. So I'll link to that in the episode notes as well, because the Eat Fit app has stuff about our Eat Fit restaurant partners, and a bunch of recipes too, y'all. But it also has these brand specific shopping guides that can really walk you through different products that, when we say looking for these real whole foods, we've got them there. But also there are some foods that might be minimally processed that can kind of fit that bill and might be a good stepping stone for you as well. So as you're on this journey of tuning into the reasons that we overeat, the reasons that you might be feeling this, as you're on this journey, let me know what's working for you. Let me know what strategies you've tried, what works, what doesn't work. I always learn so much when I'm hearing back from y'all. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you would like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.